Dust and dreams. The sun, a malevolent eye in the hazy sky, beat down on Maya's back as she slopped water into the trough for the pigs. Dust, the color of dried blood, swirled around her ankles, coating everything in a fine, gritty film. The pigs grunted and shoved, their coarse hair bristling with mud, oblivious to the weight of Maya's day. She envied their simple existence, their lack of awareness. All they knew was mud and slop. She knew the endless cycle of chores, the gnawing emptiness in her stomach, and the growing fear etched on her father's face. She finished with the pigs and moved on to the chickens, scattering feed that barely covered the parched earth. They pecked furiously, a flurry of brown and white feathers, their beady eyes gleaming with a primal hunger that mirrored her own. The air hung thick with the smell of manure and desperation. Later, hidden away in the dilapidated barn, amid stacks of brittle hay and the ghosts of harvests past, Maya found solace. A tattered copy of Around the World in 80 Days, rescued from a discarded box at the edge of town, lay open in her lap. The pages were yellowed and brittle, the spine cracked, but to Maya, it was a portal. She traced the routes of Falia's fog with a dirty finger, imagining bustling marketplaces, exotic landscapes, and a world far removed from the dust and despair of her family's farm. The words were worn smooth with repeated readings, but each time they sparked a new flicker of hope within her, a hope that whispered of possibilities beyond the horizon. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a fleeting beauty that felt both precious and mocking. Maya knew she had to return to the house. The fantasy would have to wait. She marked her page with a fallen feather and carefully tucked the book back into its hiding place, a secret treasure in a world that seemed determined to steal everything else. The house was small, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and simmering beans. Jedediah, her father, sat at the worn wooden table, his shoulders slumped, staring blankly at the chipped enamel of his plate. His face, usually weathered and kind, was drawn and gaunt, the lines around his eyes deepened by worry. "Evening, Papa," Maya said softly, taking her usual seat. He grunted in response, his eyes not meeting hers. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the clatter of spoons against plates. The beans were thin and watery, seasoned with nothing but a pinch of salt. It was the same meal they had been eating for weeks. "The south field is bone dry," Jedediah finally said, his voice raspy. Not a drop of rain in sight. Maya picked at her beans, her appetite gone. She knew what that meant. Another failed harvest. More debt. More hardship. Maybe we can try planting something different next season, she suggested, her voice barely a whisper. Something that can withstand the drought. Jedediah sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "We've tried everything, Maya. Everything." His gaze finally met hers, and she saw a flicker of something in his eyes that frightened her, a desperate resignation. "Don't say that, Papa," she pleaded, her voice catching in her throat. "We'll figure something out. We always do." He forced a weak smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're a good girl, Maya. Too good for this life." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Maya pushed her plate away, the beans suddenly tasting like ashes in her mouth. She knew her father loved her, but his love felt like a burden, a reminder of his own failures. Later, as she lay on her straw-filled mattress, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, Maya couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. The dust swirled outside her window, carried on a wind that seemed to whisper secrets of hardship and loss. She clutched the small, smooth stone she always kept under her pillow, a tangible connection to the earth, to her home. But tonight, even the stone offered little comfort. The dreams of faraway lands, of bustling cities and thrilling adventures, seemed impossibly distant, fading into the darkness like stars swallowed by the dust. A bargain struck. The thud of the ledger against the scarred tabletop was a grim percussion to Maya's roiling anxiety. Her mother, Martha, voice sharp with desperation, assailed Jedediah. We're sinking, Jedediah. The bank. The merchants. They're circling like vultures, demanding payment we can't conjure. Jedediah, hunched in his chair, raked a weary hand through his thinning hair, a gesture less of defiance, more an admission of defeat. I know, Martha, I know. What miracle do you expect me to perform? Maya, perched nervously on her bed, feigned absorption in her well-loved adventure novel, its pages quivering in her trembling grip. But the printed words blurred, dissolving in the rising tide of her parents' anguish. Try doing something besides drowning your sorrows at the rusty mug. Martha's voice frayed at the edges. Can't you see her, Jedediah? Your daughter, withering away, escaping into fantasies while we starve. Jedediah recoiled, his gaze darting towards Maya, before quickly shying away. I'm going out, he mumbled, snatching his worn jacket for its peg. Need some air. The rusty mug reeked of sour beer and broken dreams. Jedediah slumped onto a stool, the familiar stench a perverse comfort. He flagged down the bartender for a whiskey, the amber liquid searing a temporary reprieve down his throat. At the far end of the bar, Silas Blackwood sat alone, an anomaly in the raucous setting. He sipped a drink that appeared suspiciously like tea, his keen, intelligent eyes surveying the room with detached interest. A newcomer, his tailored clothes and reserved manner set him apart from the hardscrabble farmers and weary townsfolk. Bolstered by the whiskey's deceptive warmth, Jedediah found himself inexplicably drawn to the man's composed presence. He lurched over. Evenin', he mumbled, settling heavily on the stool beside Silas. Silas arched a brow, a fleeting, enigmatic expression in his gaze. Good evening, he responded, his voice surprisingly smooth. They spoke, or rather, Jedediah rambled, about the unrelenting drought, the failing farm, the suffocating pressure of debt. Silas listened with unhurried patience, offering the occasional nod or a contemplative murmur. Fueled by liquor and the aching need to confide, Jedediah found himself divulging more than he intended. Got nothing left, he confessed, his voice thick with self-pity. Nothing but my girl, and she deserves better than this parched wasteland. Silas's gaze intensified. Your daughter? Maya, Jedediah replied, a brief flicker of paternal pride illuminating his face. Sharpest mind you'll ever find. Eats up books like they're candy, even out here in the sticks. The conversation ambled onward, punctuated by Jedediah's increasingly slurred pronouncements and Silas's quiet observations. Then, a new bottle materialized behind the bar, a sleek, imposing vessel with a label shimmering gold. The bartender announced its arrival, a limited edition Kentucky bourbon, aged for 2 decades. Jedediah's eyes widened in disbelief. He'd heard tales of such rare spirits, bottles that commanded a price exceeding a year's worth of meager harvests. Wouldn't even be able to afford the smell of that, he muttered, more to himself than Silas. Silas's lips curved into a strange, unsettling smile. Perhaps a wager is in order. The details grew hazy, lost in the swirling vortex of alcohol and desperation. A game of cards commenced. The stakes escalated with each deal. And then, the unthinkable, I'll wager. I'll wager Maya. Jedediah heard himself utter, the words ejected from his lips like ejected stones. Silas's eyes gleamed in the dim light. Intriguing. And what, precisely, would I be winning? She'll work for you. As housekeeper, apprentice. She's quick-witted, learns fast. Jedediah's voice was barely a whisper, laced with dread. Silas considered the offer, his gaze unwavering. If I win, I will take Maya to my estate as my ward. I will provide her with education, shelter, and opportunity to blossom into a life far beyond this miserable town. He paused, the silence hanging heavy. And if I lose, I forfeit the bottle. The card game concluded swiftly. Silas emerged victorious. Back at the farm, Jedediah stood before Maya, his face ashen and twisted with remorse. Martha stood by his side, her eyes swollen and red-rimmed. Maya, he stammered, avoiding her piercing gaze. I made a bargain. Maya stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. What kind of bargain, Pa? He confessed, the words a garbled mess of whiskey and regret. He told her about the stranger, the card game, the stakes. The color drained from Maya's face, leaving her skin ashen. The book slipped from her numb fingers, landing on the worn floorboards with a soft, final sound. You traded me, she whispered, her voice fragile and thin. Jedediah flinched, as if struck. Tears welled in his eyes, brimming over. I did it for you, Maya. To rescue you from this ruin. He's a wealthy man, Maya. He'll offer you a better life. But all Maya heard was the deafening weight of betrayal. A better life predicated on her own liberty being stripped away. A destiny not of her choosing. A life plundered by the father she loved, all in exchange for a bottle of bourbon. The stranger's estate. The carriage lurched, each turn of the wheels carrying Maya further from the only life she'd ever known. The worn fabric of her dress felt scratchy against her skin, a constant reminder of her helplessness. Sunlight, fractured by the grimy window, painted dancing patterns on the opposite seat, but Maya found no joy in their fleeting beauty. Fear, cold and clammy, had taken root in her stomach. The landscape shifted, gone with the familiar patchwork fields and wind-battered barns. Towering trees, their branches intertwined like grasping fingers, lined the road. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something floral and sweet, almost cloying. Finally, the carriage slowed. Maya's breath hitched as the gates came into view. Wrought iron, twisted into intricate patterns of leaves and vines, loomed high above, a silent barrier between her past and whatever awaited her. They swung open with a groan that echoed in the sudden stillness. The drive stretched onward, a seemingly endless ribbon of gravel winding through manicured lawns and meticulously sculpted gardens. Statues, carved from pale marble, stood sentinel amongst the flower beds, their faces impassive. Maya felt like a trespasser, an intruder in a world she didn't understand. Then the house came into view. It wasn't a house, not like anything she had ever seen. It was a mansion, a sprawling edifice of gray stone that seemed to rise organically from the landscape. Turrets pierced the sky, their pointed roofs glinting in the afternoon sun. Rows of windows, like watchful eyes, stared down at her. The carriage stopped before a grand entrance, flanked by imposing columns. A liveried footman, his face impassive, opened the door. Maya hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached for the offered assistance. He didn't smile, didn't offer any reassurance, simply waited. Stepping onto the stone landing felt like crossing a threshold into another reality. The air here was different, cleaner, scented with beeswax and something subtly spicy. Inside, the entrance hall was vast and echoing, floored with polished marble that reflected the light from a crystal chandelier suspended high above. Silas Blackwood stood waiting, a figure of quiet authority in the opulent surroundings. He didn't smile, but his eyes, the same unsettling shade of gray as the house, held a flicker of something Maya couldn't decipher. "Welcome, Miss Rodriguez," he said, his voice a low rumble that resonated in the cavernous space. "I trust your journey was tolerable?" Maya swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "Yes, sir." "Good. Come, let me show you around." He led her through a series of rooms, each more lavish than the last. Rooms filled with ornate furniture, tapestries depicting scenes of knights and dragons, and paintings framed in gilded splendor. Maya felt increasingly lost, overwhelmed by the sheer extravagance. Then, he led her to the library. It was a vast, book-lined sanctuary, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and leather. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rows upon rows of shelves that stretched to the ceiling. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Maya stopped, mesmerized. She had never seen so many books in one place. "This," Silas said, a hint of something akin to pride in his voice, "is my sanctuary. You are welcome to spend as much time here as you wish. He then led her to another room, smaller and more intimate, filled with sculptures and paintings. Unlike the formal portraits in the other rooms, these depicted landscapes and still lives, bursting with color and life. Art, Silas explained, is another form of knowledge, another way to see the world. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, Silas led Maya to a dining room. It was smaller than the others, the table set for two with gleaming silverware and delicate china. A woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, introduced as Mrs. Hawthorne, served them a simple meal: roasted chicken with rosemary potatoes and steamed asparagus. It was unlike anything Maya had ever tasted. The chicken was tender and flavorful, the potatoes perfectly seasoned, the asparagus crisp and sweet. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, a small spark of pleasure igniting within her. As she ate, Silas observed her, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak, didn't offer any platitudes. He simply watched. Despite the opulent surroundings, despite the imposing presence of Silas Blackwood, Maya began to feel a flicker of something new. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something akin to curiosity, a tentative willingness to see what this strange new world held in store. This estate, this grand prison, might not be the cage she had feared. It might be something else entirely. A millionaire's secret. The heavy oak resonated as it closed behind Mrs. Grimshaw, isolating Maya with Silas in the echoing drawing room. The air, redolent of beeswax polish and a certain indefinable antiquity, pressed down on her. Silas indicated a velvet armchair with a sweep of his hand. "Please sit, Maya. There are matters to discuss." She settled gingerly onto the edge, hands knotted in her lap. Silas, surprisingly nimble for his years, lowered himself into the opposing seat. From the hearth, the fire chattered, painting the walls with capricious light. "Doubtless, you are curious," Silas commenced, his voice a resonant baritone, "as to why you find yourself here." Maya could only nod, her own voice trapped in her throat. The recent events swam around her, a disorienting mirage from which she couldn't awaken. Silas tinted his fingers, his gaze unwavering. "The man who obtained you labored under a misapprehension. He believed he was settling a debt. But I perceive something in you, Maya, something more profound." His words, rather than solace, offered only further mystification. Was she not still a mere object of transaction, albeit one with a higher price tag? As if reading her doubts, he continued, "That is not my meaning. I understand this is difficult to credit, but I intend to assist you." "Assist me." The words emerged as a mere rasp. Silas inclined forward. "I was not always this secluded. In years past, I was known as Silas Blackwood, the inventor. Perhaps the name resonates?" Maya shook her head. The only names familiar to her were those whispered in the marketplace, the currency of obligation and desperate deals. "I held numerous patents," Silas elaborated, a spark of past achievement igniting in his eyes. "Revolutionized entire fields. Amassed a considerable fortune." He paused to let this information register. Maya scrutinized him, struggling to reconcile the reticent figure before her with the image of a celebrated innovator. But the city, the ceaseless demands, the relentless pursuit of novelty, it depleted me. I grew weary of the cacophony, the ambition. I craved simplicity. He indicated the room. A thread of self-mockery laced through his voice. "Perhaps I overcompensated. So you retreated here?" Maya ventured, barely audible. "Precisely. I acquired this estate, seeking tranquility, a haven to contemplate, to create at my own speed, divorced from the world's pressures." He sighed, the sound heavy. "But serenity, it appears, is a slippery thing." His gaze sharpened, fixing on her. "When I beheld you, Maya, I recognized a nascent intelligence, a potential squandered by circumstance. I saw a keen intellect confined by conditions not of your choosing, and I elected to intervene." He stood and moved to the window, his back presented to her. "I can present you with something unobtainable elsewhere." an education, a chance to learn, to flourish, to unearth your own gifts. I can furnish you with the resources to become anything you aspire to. Maya reeled. It was all too overwhelming. Education? Opportunity? These were indulgences beyond the scope of her wildest imaginings. Turning back, his expression was somber. I extint inu mea handout, Maya. I offer a portal, but it demands diligence, commitment, and a thirst for knowledge. Are you prepared to embrace it? Her thoughts collided, a jumble of confusion. Was this genuine? Some elaborate deceit? Yet, in Silas's eyes, she discerned only conviction. A tentative hope unfurled within her. What would be required of me? She stammered. Firstly, you would master reading and writing, Silas responded. Subsequently, we would delve into mathematics, science, literature, history. The world is boundless, Maya, a treasure trove awaiting discovery. A smile, genuine and warming, reshaped his features. And, in time, perhaps you will enlighten me in turn. He paused, affording her space to consider. I appreciate this as a great deal to assimilate. Reflect upon it, Maya. Should you accept my proposal, we shall commence. Should you decline, I will arrange your safe departure. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was a precipice, a chance to shed the shackles of her past. Fear tangled with excitement, skepticism with budding faith. But beneath it all, a small voice urged yes. Rising, her legs trembled faintly. She met Silas's gaze, her eyes mirroring a blend of trepidation and resolve. I accept, she declared, her voice gaining strength. I desire to learn. A hint of a smile graced Silas's lips. Then welcome, Maya, to Blackwood Manor. Your tutelage begins on the morrow. Lessons and whispers. The following morning arrived, a study in contrasts. Sharp air, luminous sun. Sunlight, a painter's stroke, slashed through the library's towering windows, revealing the silent dance of dust. Maya, small against the imposing mahogany desk, poised chalk above slate. Silas Blackwood watched, his face a mask of inscrutability, his presence as solid as the ancient stones of the manor. The alphabet first, Maya, he rumbled, his voice a deep cello note. Practice until the forms are ingrained. A tremor ran through Maya's hand as she etched a hesitant, uneven, ungainly, yet she pressed on. The hours evaporated, marked only by the dry rasp of chalk, the hush of the vast chamber. Silas remained a quiet sentinel, offering guidance with a light touch, patience his only expression. Then came reading, a cascade of new worlds unleashed. Silas possessed a library vast and varied, from crumbling treatises on forgotten empires to vivid compendiums of flora and fauna. She consumed them, her mind a parched earth drinking deep. Distant realms, celestial spheres, the delicate machinery of the body, all unfolded before her. Science, in particular, captivated. Silas's laboratory was a wonderland of strange instruments and bubbling concoctions. He unveiled their secrets, elucidating the principles of physics and chemistry with crystalline clarity. Maya's initial reserve dissolved, supplanted by an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. Questions tumbled from her lips, her mind a bottomless well. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. Blackwood Manor transformed into a refuge, a sanctuary where she could finally unfurl, unburdened by her past. A muted ache for her family lingered, a phantom limb, yet the joy of discovery dulled the pain. Meanwhile, back in Oakhaven, whispers spiraled like smoke. Agnes Hawthorne, a woman whose tongue was as honed as her pruning shears, focused her keen attention on Blackwood Manor. Her prim garden bordered the estate, affording her an unobstructed view. She noted the carriage's arrival weeks prior, a girl emerging. She'd observed Maya tending the roses, her hair catching the sun like spun gold. And she'd witnessed Silas Blackwood, a man shrouded in solitude for years, walking alongside her, conversing, instructing. Unseemly, she muttered, viciously clipping a faded bloom. Utterly unseemly. She could not comprehend Silas Blackwood, a man of such elevated station, harboring a girl like Maya Rodriguez. Her mind wove tapestries of conjecture, each thread more scandalous than the last, and she made sure to share these fantasies liberally. One afternoon, Mrs. Hawthorne encountered Tom Abernathy, the blacksmith's affable son, repairing her fence. "Tom, dear," she cooed, her voice laced with saccharine sweetness. "Have you noticed that girl at Blackwood Manor?" Tom nodded, driving a nail home with a practice blow. "Aye, Mrs. Hawthorne. Seems Mr. Blackwood's taken her in." "Taken her in," Mrs. Hawthorne scoffed, a sound like shattering glass. "A rather delicate way of phrasing it. Wouldn't you agree? I heard her father sold her to him. A transaction sealed with a bottle of cheap whiskey. Doesn't it strike you as odd, such behavior from a gentleman of Mr. Blackwood's caliber?" She leaned in, lowering her voice to a confidential murmur. "Some whisper she's there as a mere servant. Others suggest far more sinister motives." Tom shifted, his hammer suspended in the air. He'd heard the rumors, of course, but dismissed them as the wind-blown chaff of gossip. However, Mrs. Hawthorne's words, like insidious seeds, took root. "I don't know, Mrs. Hawthorne," he stammered. "Mr. Blackwood always struck me as a good man." "Good." Mrs. Hawthorne's laugh was a brittle weapon. "Appearances, Tom, are notoriously deceptive. Mark my words, something dark is brewing at Blackwood Manor, and we, as a community, have a sacred obligation to unearth it." She adjusted her spectacles, her gaze fixed on the distant manor. "For the sake of us all, of course." Tom frowned, his lip caught between his teeth. He glanced toward the imposing silhouette of Blackwood Manor, a cold dread settling in his gut. The sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood and shadow. Mrs. Hawthorne's insinuations hung in the air, a palpable miasma. He wanted to dismiss them, yet they clung to him, stubborn and tenacious, like burrs to wool. The self-watering garden. "The persistent dryness is the crux of it," Silas declared, sketching with manic energy on a sprawling sheet of parchment. "Our current method hinges precariously on sporadic rainfall, and, let's be honest, my intermittent memory when it comes to watering the darn plants." Maya leaned in, her gaze fixed on the drawing. "So, the challenge is consistent hydration, directed right to the roots, independent of your forgetfulness or the fickle sky." She tapped her chin thoughtfully, a gesture absorbed from Silas. "Consider wicking." Silas paused, brow furrowed in thought. "Wicking? Elaborate." "Like those old oil lamps," Maya explained, her voice gaining conviction. "The fuel ascends the wick to feed the flame. Could we adapt that principle for water and flora?" A spark ignited in Silas's eyes. He seized another sheet, rapidly drafting a novel design, a network of buried terracotta vessels linked by thick cotton strands. "Brilliant, Maya. Simply brilliant. The pots become miniature reservoirs, and the wicks will draw moisture upward, nourishing the roots directly." He whirled around, radiating enthusiasm. "We'll require earthenware pots, hefty cotton rope, gravel for proper drainage, and a substantial water reserve. The ancient well should suffice nicely." The following days dissolved into a whirlwind of activity. They wrestled clay pots from the musty storage shed, dust coating their hands. They measured and sliced lengths of coarse cotton rope, the fibers chafing their skin. Silas, surprisingly spry for his years, supervised the excavation, ensuring precise alignment of the trenches for the submerged pots. Maya, drawing from her geography lessons, meticulously layered gravel within each trench, promoting optimal drainage. Working in tandem, they discovered a shared rhythm, a silent understanding bridging their disparate origins. Silas, typically immersed in his inventions and ruminations, seemed revitalized by Maya's grounded perspective. Conversely, Maya flourished under his tutelage, her initial diffidence giving way to a growing sense of capability and confidence. At long last, the system stood complete. They stepped back, flushed with exertion, and examined their creation. It resembled a freshly prepared garden plot, concealing a subterranean web of innovation awaiting its trial. Silas activated the pump connected to the aging well, and water trickled into the buried clay vessels. They waited, breath held, alert for any sign of leakage or failure. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the soil around the buried pots darkened with dampness. Within weeks, the garden erupted in a vibrant display of life. Vegetables shot forth, their leaves a lush emerald. Flowers burst into a kaleidoscope of colors, their heady perfume permeating the air. The automated irrigation system proved a resounding triumph. The garden's flourishing beauty attracted attention. Villagers, lured by the dazzling colors and intoxicating fragrance, began to linger, their initial doubt supplanted by admiration. Tom Abernathy, the blacksmith's son, became a regular visitor, bombarding Silas with questions about the ingenious watering mechanism. Silas, usually reclusive and dismissive, seemed to relish Tom's curiosity, patiently expounding on the principles of wicking and capillary action. However, universal acclaim was not to be. Agnes Hawthorne observed the garden's burgeoning splendor from a distance, her lips compressed in disapproval. The spectacle of villagers lavishing praise on Silas and his exotic garden only deepened her animosity. She interpreted it as further evidence of Silas's deviousness and Maya's alleged manipulation. One afternoon, Tom Abernathy was assisting Maya with weeding when Mrs. Hawthorne materialized at the garden's edge, her face a twisted mask of rage. "Show off," she screeched, her voice cracking with venom. "Trying to make us all look like fools with your fancy contraption." Tom, startled by the outburst, instinctively stepped in front of Maya, shielding her. "Mrs. Hawthorne, what are you talking about? It's just a garden." "Just a garden?" she spat, her voice dripping with scorn. "It's an ostentatious display of arrogance. And that girl, she's bewitched him, I tell you. She's using her feminine tricks to control him." Tom, normally even-tempered, bristled at her accusations. He had personally witnessed Maya's unwavering dedication and keen intelligence. He had observed Silas's genuine fondness for her. He would not tolerate Mrs. Hawthorne's unfounded slander. "That's simply not true, Mrs. Hawthorne, and you know it. Maya has been nothing but kind and helpful. And Silas, well, he's always been a bit peculiar, but he's a good man at heart." Mrs. Hawthorne glared at Tom, her eyes mere slits. "You've all been duped, just like the rest. You'll all see. This won't end favorably." She spun around and stalked away, muttering dark pronouncements. Tom watched her retreat, a seed of apprehension taking root in his stomach. He turned to Maya, noticing her pale face and downcast gaze. Mrs. Hawthorne's venomous words, though baseless, had clearly struck a nerve. The self-watering garden, intended as a testament to ingenuity and collaborative effort, had inadvertently transformed into a point of contention in an escalating conflict. Sabotage and resilience. The withered plants greeted Maya like a physical blow. Yesterday, the tomato vines had reached skyward, pregnant with future harvests. Today they sagged, blackened at the base, the tiny green fruit puckering and dying on the vine. The cucumbers, once a vibrant verdant hue, were now jaundiced, their skins wrinkled like aged parchment. The earth, recently moist and fertile, was a desolate landscape of cracks and hardened clods. A sharp, acrid odor permeated the air, assaulting Maya's senses. Fear seized her. She raced to the reservoir, their old clawfoot bathtub repurposed for the wicking system. Utterly depleted, the supporting bricks, meticulously arranged to feed the plants, lay scattered, some pulverized. A frigid premonition slithered down her back, transcending the morning's chill. This wasn't mere oversight. It was intentional sabotage. Her eyes scanned the perimeter, seeking clues. A fractured branch, its break stark white, lay near the fence. Beside it, a subtle depression in the yielding soil, the ghost of a heel print. And then, the faintest whiff of a sickly sweet perfume, a saccharine floral scent that turned Maya's stomach. Mrs. Hawthorne. The realization landed with the weight of lead. Mrs. Hawthorne, whose gaze held veiled disapproval, whose words dripped with accusations of undue influence. Mrs. Hawthorne, who misconstrued Silas's benevolence as vulnerability and viewed Maya as an unwelcome intrusion. Tears threatened, but Maya stifled them. Weeping offered no solutions. Silas had found such joy, such renewed purpose in the garden. This assault struck at him, not merely the plants, and Maya would not allow it. She bolted to the potting shed, frantically searching for a shovel and pail. First, water was paramount. The well was a distant prospect, but unavoidable. Each journey was an arduous trial, her slight frame protesting the weight of the brimming bucket. Yet, with each drenching splash in the parched reservoir, her resolve hardened. The sun climbed, turning the earth into a furnace. Maya ignored the stinging sweat, the throbbing in her limbs. She assessed the damage, meticulously pruning the blighted foliage, trying to salvage what she could. She rebuilt the wicking system, carefully piecing together the shattered bricks, her fingers scraped and sore. She recalled Silas's teachings, his dedicated study of botany, his understanding of the delicate ecosystem. She prepared a baking soda solution, remembering its properties as a natural fungicide, and sprayed the afflicted plants, hoping to neutralize the poison in the soil. As twilight painted the sky in vivid strokes of coral and violet, Silas appeared. He stood at the garden's edge, a dark form silhouetted against the fading light. Wordlessly, he observed Maya, her face smeared with dirt, toiling relentlessly. He saw the scattered bricks, the empty reservoir, the ravaged plants. He witnessed the exhaustion etched upon her features, the unwavering grit in her eyes. Finally, he approached. "Maya," he said gently, his voice thick with concern. "You need to rest." She glanced up, startled. I have to fix it," she faltered, gesturing to the despoiled garden. "Mrs. Hawthorne." She couldn't voice the accusation, but Silas understood. He knelt beside her, his gaze sweeping over the devastation. A muscle clenched in his jaw. He didn't speak of vengeance or resentment. Instead, he said, "Let me help." Together, they labored into the late hours, bathed in the soft luminescence of lanterns. Silas, despite his years, worked with surprising vigor, repairing the damage, reinforcing the infrastructure. He demonstrated how to oxygenate the soil, how to erect temporary shade for the most vulnerable plants. Just as the first tendrils of dawn brushed the horizon, a figure materialized from the woods. Tom Abernathy, his countenance burdened with remorse. "Maya," he confessed, his voice barely audible. I saw her. Mrs. Hawthorne. Last night. She was emptying something into the reservoir." Maya straightened, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Why didn't you say anything?" Tom shuffled his feet. She said it was for the best, that you were bewitching Mr. Blackwood. I thought." His voice trailed off, shamefaced. "I was wrong. I'm so sorry." He stepped forward, extending his hands in supplication. "Let me help. I'll haul water. I'll do anything." Maya hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right, Tom. There's work to be done." As the sun ascended, bathing the revitalized garden in its golden light, Maya felt a stirring of something she hadn't experienced in a while. Hope. Mrs. Hawthorne had attempted to break them, to annihilate their creation, but she had underestimated Maya's spirit and the unexpected strength of her allies. The garden was scarred, but it would recover, and so would she. Truth and exposure. The garden, resurrected from the brink, exploded with life. Tomatoes, plump and scarlet, hung heavy on their vines. The air hummed with the industry of bees, drunk on the nectar of Maya's carefully cultivated blooms. Even Silas seemed surprised by its vibrancy, a genuine smile crinkling the corners of his eyes as he surveyed their shared creation. Mrs. Hawthorne's pointed barbs about the ill-fated plot withered on her tongue, replaced by a tight-lipped silence that spoke volumes. The victory, however, felt fragile. Maya couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Hawthorne was merely regrouping, plotting her next attack. She found herself more alert, noticing shadows out of the corner of her eye, the rustle of leaves that seemed too deliberate. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, Maya decided to take a final stroll through the garden. The air was cool against her skin, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil and night-blooming jasmine. A faint light flickered from the direction of Silas's workshop, a building usually shrouded in darkness at this hour. Frowning, Maya quickened her pace. Silas rarely worked past supper. As she approached, she heard a muffled clatter. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She crept closer, peering through a gap in the overgrown ivy that clung to the wall. Inside, bathed in the weak glow of a lantern, Mrs. Hawthorne wrestled with a bulky contraption of gears and wires. It was one of Silas's inventions. She realized, a device he'd been tinkering with for months, something to do with harnessing wind power. Mrs. Hawthorne grunted with effort, her face contorted in a mask of greedy determination. She was trying to pry the device loose from its moorings on the workbench. Maya's initial shock morphed into a cold fury. This wasn't just disapproval or petty sabotage. This was outright theft. She couldn't let her get away with it. Thinking fast, she circled around to the front of the workshop. The door was unlocked, a careless oversight on Mrs. Hawthorne's part. Maya slipped inside, her footsteps silent on the wooden floor. "Looking for something, Mrs. Hawthorne?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Mrs. Hawthorne whirled around, her eyes wide with panic. A wrench slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. "Maya, what are you doing here?" I thought I saw a rat." Maya raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "A rat that requires dismantling Silas's inventions? It's dangerous, child. All this wizardry. It's not natural." Mrs. Hawthorne's voice trembled, but Maya saw the glint of defiance in her eyes. "Dangerous or valuable?" Maya countered, stepping further into the workshop. Her gaze fell on a coil of rope lying near the door. An idea sparked in her mind. "I think the townspeople should see what you're really up to, Mrs. Hawthorne." Before Mrs. Hawthorne could react, Maya snatched up the rope and, with a speed she didn't know she possessed, looped it around the heavy workbench, effectively trapping Mrs. Hawthorne behind it. "You wouldn't dare!" Mrs. Hawthorne shrieked, her face turning a mottled red. Maya ignored her, throwing open the workshop door and cupping her hands around her mouth. "Help! Someone help! Mrs. Hawthorne is trying to steal from Mr. Blackwood." Her voice carried on the evening air, piercing the quiet of the town. Within minutes, lanterns bobbed in the distance, growing closer with each passing moment. Tom Abernathy was among the first to arrive, his face etched with concern. "What's going on here, Maya?" "Mrs. Hawthorne was trying to steal Silas's invention," Maya said, pointing to the trapped woman. "I caught her in the act." Mrs. Hawthorne sputtered, struggling against the rope. "It's a lie. She's making it up." Tom hesitated, his gaze shifting between Maya and Mrs. Hawthorne. Then his eyes landed on the muddy footprints leading from the garden to the workshop, the same footprints he'd seen earlier that day, leading away from the drained reservoir. "I saw her," Tom said, his voice firm. "Earlier today, I saw Mrs. Hawthorne near the reservoir. She looked like she was messing with something." He avoided Mrs. Hawthorne's furious gaze, his loyalty finally outweighing his fear of social disapproval. As more townspeople gathered, drawn by the commotion, the truth became undeniable. Mrs. Hawthorne, exposed and defeated, could only glare at Maya with venomous eyes. The whispers started, spreading like wildfire through the crowd. The woman who had so readily judged and condemned Silas and Maya was now being judged herself. A brighter future. The murmuring rippled through the crowd like wind through a wheat field. Silas, standing tall and unwavering despite the setting sun casting long shadows across his face, raised a hand for silence. The air crackled with anticipation. "Agnes Hawthorne," he began, his voice resonating with a quiet authority that commanded attention, "believed she knew my secret. She suspected I was not merely a recluse, a simple scholar. She was right in part. I am, in fact, Silas Blackwood." A collective gasp swept through the onlookers. Silas Blackwood. The name was synonymous with innovation, with wealth beyond imagining. His inventions were legendary, his factories scattered across the globe, employing thousands. Jedediah, standing near the back, felt his knees weaken. He looked at Maya, her expression unreadable in the fading light. "I chose to live here, to remain anonymous," Silas continued, "because I sought peace, a respite from the demands of my other life. I never intended for my identity to become a weapon, a source of fear or suspicion." He paused, his gaze softening as it rested on Maya. But Mrs. Hawthorne's accusations were fueled by something other than truth. They were born of malice, a desire to control and manipulate. The crowd, which had been openly hostile towards Silas only days before, now seemed genuinely conflicted. They had witnessed Mrs. Hawthorne's treachery, her blatant attempt to steal Silas's wind turbine schematics. They had seen Maya's resilience, her dedication to the garden, and her quiet dignity. Silas stepped closer to Maya, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Maya," he said, his voice now carrying a deep tenderness, came to Blackwood Manor under unusual circumstances. Circumstances I deeply regret. But she has proven herself to be intelligent, resourceful, and compassionate. She has a thirst for knowledge and a spirit that deserves to be nurtured. He turned back to the crowd. "I offer her an opportunity, not exploitation. I offer her education, security, and a chance to realize her full potential." He looked directly at Jedediah. "The choice, however, is hers." All eyes turned to Maya. The weight of their expectations, their curiosity, pressed down on her. She looked at Silas, his face etched with concern, then at her father, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and shame. She thought of the dusty attic room she'd shared with her siblings, the gnawing hunger, the endless cycle of poverty. Then she thought of the library at Blackwood Manor, the fragrant garden, the stimulating conversations, the feeling of her mind expanding with each new discovery. She took a deep breath. "I choose to stay," she said, her voice clear and strong, surprising even herself. "I want to learn. I want to help." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, a palpable sense of relief washing over them. Even Tom, who had been hovering anxiously at the edge of the gathering, visibly relaxed. Mrs. Hawthorne, standing rigid and pale, was escorted away by 2 constables, her face a mask of fury. In the days that followed, Blackwood Manor underwent a transformation. Silas, no longer hiding his wealth, began to invest in the town. He established a school, staffed with qualified teachers, offering free education to all the children, regardless of their family circumstances. He modernized the local farms, providing them with access to his inventions and innovative farming techniques. He funded the construction of a clinic, ensuring that everyone had access to medical care. Maya, under Silas's tutelage, blossomed. She devoured books on science, mathematics, and history, her mind racing with new ideas and possibilities. She became Silas's apprentice, assisting him with his inventions, her quick wit and sharp intellect proving invaluable. Together, they designed a curriculum for the new school, focusing on practical skills and critical thinking. Maya, remembering her own struggles, insisted on including lessons on basic hygiene and nutrition. She also organized a gardening club, teaching the children how to grow their own food. Jedediah, watching his daughter thrive, felt a profound sense of regret and a flicker of hope. He started working at the local mill, saving every penny he could. He visited Maya often, always keeping a respectful distance, watching her from afar as she laughed and learned. He enrolled his younger children in the new school, determined to give them the opportunities he had never had. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves turned to gold and crimson, Maya found Jedediah sitting on a bench near the schoolhouse. She sat beside him, the silence stretching between them. "Thank you, Papa," she said softly, breaking the quiet. Jedediah looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. "I didn't deserve that," he whispered. "I failed you." "You gave me a chance," Maya replied, squeezing his hand. "A chance at a better life. And Silas is a good man." Jedediah nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He agreed. He's given you something I never could." Maya smiled. "We both have," she said. "We have a future." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. As darkness fell, the lights from the schoolhouse flickered on, casting a warm glow on the faces of the children inside, their laughter echoing through the quiet town. A brighter future, indeed, had begun to dawn.